Thank you, President JW. Good morning. We are in for a treat today. I've only known Russ since the 8th grade at Mount Brook Junior High. I've heard this presentation 2 or 3 times, so I'm going to be very brief with the introduction so we can let him have all the time. I do want to point out just a few highlights about Russ. Number one, he was raised here in Birmingham and is very proud of that fact. So we're glad he's back in town. Russ is married to Laura. They have 3 wonderful children and 2 incredible grandchildren. Okay, some statistics here. Russ graduated 1980 from Mount Brook High School, 1984 from Birmingham Southern College. He earned his Master of Divinity from Virginia Theological Seminary, his Doctor of Ministry from Beeson Divinity. He has served churches in Virginia, Tennessee, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida before he moved 16 years ago to Houston as rector at St. Martin's Episcopal Church. And I can honestly say he is the only alumni of Mount Brook High School that has been appointed a position by Queen Elizabeth. In 2021, he was appointed by Her Majesty, the late Queen Elizabeth II, sub-prelate of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem. Russ has preached and officiated at the funerals of Jean Cernan, who was the last person to step foot on the moon, and George and Barbara Bush. He's written several devotional books, which are available on Amazon, but today we're here to hear about Witness to Dignity, the life and faith of George H.W. Bush. This book has received accolades from all the major networks and was a one to read in 2023 by the New York Post. Janet and I have given numerous books to our family and friends, and it is the best gift that we've ever given, according to all of them. Mother's Day is coming up in a couple of weeks, so I would encourage you to get this book. It is a great read. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Russ Levenson.
Way too nice. He read it just like I wrote it. So it's great to be with you. It's great to be in Birmingham, which is home in many ways. I'm so grateful for the invitation, and I appreciate Norman. Norman and I were together for the Sunrise Rotary Club today, so I just kind of camped out here for the day. And then the introduction to JW, and of course Billy and I know each other from many years ago. And as he said, we will only tell good stories about one another from the high school days. So I am proud to be from Birmingham. It's richly runs through my blood. My dad is here today. And I think in large part, I'm here because my dad's here and because of the way in which he raised us in the church and in the Episcopal Church. And so I probably would not be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for my father. And then a close and dear mentor of mine for so many years since I graduated from Birmingham Southern was Dr. Birdie, Dr. Neil Birdie, where I ended up working at the college when I graduated. Bishop Curry, when I graduated, I wanted to go to seminary, and Bishop Stout said no. And in fact, what he said was, "You need to wait a few years, kid, and go get a job, and then come back and talk to me." So, which is what I did. And mercifully, Dr. Birdie took me in first in admissions and then as his assistant for a couple of years. And I learned so much in the years under his leadership. Among the many things is how to raise money. And as you know, he's very good at that. And I can tell you I'm pretty good at it too. So don't sit next to me for too long. Books a Million's here today. I appreciate Billy plugging my other books. I have devotional books that I've written a few years ago, and they are on Amazon. But Books a Million has been a really good partner with this book. Hachette's the publisher. And so wherever I've landed, if they've had a store, they kind of show up. So Books a Million and I will hang out. And then after I get through, you can decide whether or not it's a gift worthy of giving to someone. I thought I'd start with a joke because you're eating, and I want to start with one of my favorite jokes, which I thought I had in hand, but I didn't. So I had to go look it up. So you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, JW. An Illinois man left the snowball streets of Chicago for a vacation. I'm changing this a little bit. For a vacation in Perdido Beach. His wife was on a business trip and was planning to meet him there the next day. When he reached the hotel, he decided to send his wife a quick email. Unable to find the scrap of paper upon which he had written the email address, he did his best to type it from memory. Unfortunately, he missed one letter, and the note was directed instead to an elderly preacher's wife whose husband had only died a few days before. When the grieving widow checked her email, she took one look at the monitor, let out a piercing scream, fell to the ground. At that sound, her family rushed into the room and saw this note on the screen. Dearest wife, just got checked in. Everything prepared for your arrival tomorrow. Your loving husband. P.S. Sure is hot down here. So that's one of my favorites. So I just thought it has absolutely nothing to do with the talk. So the book's called Witness to Dignity. And what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about why I wrote the book. And then I have a great Eric, the AV king up there in the box, who really runs the room because he could turn it all off in a minute. Has a PowerPoint that we're going to work through together. And I want to show you some pictures, and I'll kind of talk you through those pictures. I want to read a little snippet from the book, just a little bit, and then I'm happy to take questions and answers about anything. So a little bit of history. When Billy started saying Alabama, Tennessee, Virginia, you probably thought I was outrunning the law, but I eventually, my wife and I were called in the summer of 2007, actually May of 2007, made the move to Houston in the fall. And when we came, of course, the Bushes summered in Kennebunkport, and we didn't know, frankly, whether or not they would be in church every week when they came back to Houston, or they'd come, as we call it, Creasters. Those are my business Christians who are Christmas and Easter Christians, and whether they'd come all the time, or how much they'd come, or if we even got to know them. And so fall of 2007 arrived, and they showed up one Sunday, and one of my assistants came back and said, they're here. And I said, who? I was hoping they were talking about people in the pews, and but those people were there, but the Bushes were there too. And what I saw was that they came every week. They were there every week. They're very faithful Episcopalians. The president grew up in the Episcopal Church. Barbara grew up in the Presbyterian Church until they married, and then they made their move to the Episcopal Church, where they lived out their faith. And what I began to observe over the years was just how much they loved our Lord, but they did so in a way in which it served the purposes of a greater good. They never used their faith or their religion to promote their politics or promote an agenda. These were honestly very good people. I've gotten a couple little dings from people over since the book came out in November about, do you remember when he did this? Or do you remember, those of you who are my age and older, you remember he worked with Lee Atwater, and I won't go down that road, but there were little things like that. And I said, I'm not writing about his years in office. I'm writing about the last 11 and a half years that they lived, and that my wife and I got to know them. And what I saw was something that we in our business call the process of sanctification. What I saw is these people becoming better and better and better. And so as I began to fiddle with the title, I thought about what I want to kind of call this. And I kind of worked with kind of 4 goals. And the first, I had to write all the kids, the grown-up kids, and ask them, are you okay with this idea? They all said yes. They all said, we want to read it before it goes out. I had a real problem just sitting down and so I didn't really write it until 2 years ago. So we're at the 5-year mark since their funeral, since their deaths, which is hard for me to believe. It seems like yesterday. But I just kind of toyed with it for a few years, and I'd lay it down, I'd pick it up, and then, and actually Jeb Bush, who's become a friend, was the one who kind of pushed me a little bit. And I said, I'm having trouble writing this because I don't want to come off as that person who said, I got to do a lot of neat things because I was the president's priest and pastor. And the truth is, I got to do a lot of neat things because I was the president's priest and pastor, things I would have never imagined I got to do. And so I kind of begin the book by saying, I don't know why I was put in these particular moments with these particular people. My wife and I both, I would say, Laura and I both, my wife, Laura. And I think what we began to think about was we were put in these circumstances to observe what were two incredible people. And so when I finally did sit down, I said, I really want to honor them. I want to honor their faith as it was lived out. I want to honor our faith, our Judeo-Christian tradition. And then given the time in which we're living, I spent a little time talking about the divisiveness in the public square. That is not a predominant theme in the book, but I come to the end and I say, kind of look at these lives, remember these days, remember this kind of leadership. Wouldn't we want that again in the public square? I want to pause by saying, I think I'm going to tell a story that you didn't hear this morning, Norman. Norman was at the early group, but some years ago, about 10 years ago, I was in town with my two sons. And I wanted them, we had some time on our hands. I wanted them to see the old Alabama Theater, and where I went to see movies when I was a kid. And so I drove both of them downtown, and we were in a rental car, and we parked kind of close to the theater. And my wife had just given me a kind of a nice leather bomber jacket. And I don't have a lot of nice bomber jackets or a lot of jackets, period, because I live in Houston. But it was hot that day, and I dropped it in the rental car. And we went up to the Alabama, and I was telling, and it was open. So we were able to go in, and there was this group singing in there, and they invited us in as they rehearsed. We had this great time. So we came out, and I was dressed in civvies. I wasn't dressed in my collar. And as we came out, we're walking back to the car. I noticed a guy, kind of a guy that lived on the streets, and he had opened up the car, and he was taking my bomber jacket out. And I yelled at him, forgive me, but I did. I lost all clergy sense. I said, "Hey, that's my jacket." And he took off. And I told my boys, I said, "Wait a minute." I took off after him. And I ran down the street, and right before he got to the end of the court, I said, "Hey, put my jacket down." And he laid it on the trash can and took off. I had a meaner voice than the one I even used. And then my boys come running up behind me, and and then I thought, "Oh, boys, never do that. Don't ever do that." And so I was feeling my testosterone, I was kind of up, and I go back to the car, and I'm in the car. And my younger boy, he was a younger teen at the time, and we closed doors. We start to wave him out, and just in a very quiet voice from the back, my younger son goes, "Dad, it is kind of cold out there." And I went, "Oh." So you know what I did? I started driving around looking for the guy, and I could not find him. But to this day, I thought, through the eyes of other people, we can learn so many things about what we should be and the kind of people we should be. So that was my goal. My goal was to write this book and get out of the way and be the eyes the witness that told you a story about these two people and the way in which they lived out their faith. And it was a lot of fun writing it. I was given 30 days to write it. I got the contract and was given 30 days to write it. So I went into my wife and I said goodbye. And I worked on this during the day, and I worked on my church stuff at night, and finished it in 31 days. It's way too long. The publisher is 550 pages, and the editor took care of the rest so that what you got is the 320. And as Billy said, I think some people have recognized that it's a book that speaks to a variety of kinds of people, and that's kind of the Bushes too. I tracked down this story, and this is not in the book. I tracked down this story because there are a lot of stories I could tell about them from what we saw, but I want to just kind of drop one in front of you so that you take it home and think about it when you turn on the news and watch what's happening right now. And the story comes basically from that era, the Reagan-Bush era. And I'm not promoting a particular political party. I'm pretty much independent. But many of you remember when President Reagan was shot, the assassination attempt. And as he was in recovery, he was in the hospital downtown DC. And as he was coming out of recovered from the surgery, and there was an aide in the room. All the family had seen him, and he was coming out, and there was an aide in the room with the president. And James A. Baker III, who's also a member of St. Martin's, by the way, very active and still very active member of the church. And I checked this story with him because I want to make sure it wasn't political lore. And he said, "No, that's true." So do any of you, I know some do, but do any of you remember the first public figure who visited him in the hospital? Any of you remember? No? So good, then you need to remember. It was the Democratic Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. Walked in, acknowledged the aide, went over to the president, dropped down on his knees, recited the 23rd Psalm, prayed for the president, stood up, kissed him on the forehead, and said, now I'm going to let you get better. And he left the room. And my question is, where are those days? And there were a lot of people in that time, and there were, Tip O'Neill used to call Reagan the worst president that ever lived, and I'm sure that, but they, first of all, they were both Irishmen and they loved to kind of tell drinking jokes like Episcopalians do. But they were buddies and they saw the greater good. They didn't always agree, obviously, but they knew how to treat each other as human beings. And that's what I observed in the Bushes. So at the end, once I kind of fiddled with it, I thought, what I'm going to try to do is show you the story of two people who, upon their retirement and return to Houston, who served with dignity, loved their family and friends with dignity, loved their Lord with dignity, aged with dignity, and in the end died with dignity. And I was very fortunate, and my wife and I both were, to be present for all of those moments. Wonderful sense of humor, had a great sense of humor, and you saw that all the time. Very self-effacing. But if you're a churchgoer, or whatever your religious house of worship is, you could use them as a model. Because a lot of people, when they get older, or they have some disability, or they have some sickness or illness, they use that as a reason to stop going. And of course, COVID, we all kind of checked out. But what happened, what I witnessed, is they were there every week. They were not creasters. And as they began to age, they kept coming. And so I was able to watch the president come in. When we first met him, he was tall, he was a big guy, 6'2", had big hands and a big voice. And as he began to age, he went from big guy to walking with a cane, to walking with a walker, to walking to being in a wheelchair. And that he did not stop coming because of those things. Same thing with Barbara. Barbara started kind of upright, and then she began to walk with a hurricane, if you know what that is. And then she began to walk with a walker, and then she would still come to church. One day, my wife was sitting next to Barbara in church, and she saw Barbara lean up and take a prayer book and put it behind her back because she had a bad stenosis in her back. But she didn't want anybody to see that, but it enabled her to sit there and listen and pray and sing and do the things we do in church. These were wonderful, godly people. And if you go back and look at what he accomplished in those incredible 4 years, you'll remember that a lot of that, I think, was the fruit of his own faith. So a real plumb line, I think, for the president actually happened in September of 1944, when he was shot down over the Pacific. Many of you remember this story. After he was shot down, as the plane was going down, there were 3 guys on the plane. 2 of the guys jumped out. They never found them, so killed in action. The president actually banged his head coming out of the plane, and his parachute ripped. So it's amazing that he even made it down to the water. When he got to the water, he's floating in the water. They had lots of submarines out there trying to find people. Fortunately, the USS Finback popped up out of the water, captured him. But here's a 19-year-old. Think about you at 19. Think about Billy and Russ at 19. What were we doing? We weren't thinking like this. So he came up out of the water, had some time on the Finback, and his question was, wow, or his statement was not, wow, boy, I'm glad I say, I can't wait to get home. Can't believe I made it. His question, which I think shaped who he was, is, why did God spare me? And I think he began to really meditate on that. And almost as soon as he got back to the US to kind of recover, and he didn't know if the war was going to be over or not. This was September of 44. Yeah, September of 44. And so he was back for a while, and he and Barr got married, and he didn't know if he was going to be called back to action. And then all of a sudden it was VE Day. So the war was over. And as the president puts it, he said he and Barr, oh, by the way, I do call her Barr because she told me to. I called her Mrs. Bush one time, and she said, nope, Mrs. Bush is my mother-in-law. You call me Barbara or Barr, but don't call me Mrs. Bush. Okay. And but he never said, don't call me Mr. President. So it's awkward during prayer time. It was oh Lord, be with Mr. President. But after VE Day, he and Barr, everybody went out in the streets partying. We know the stories. But the first thing they did is they sought out by themselves alone a church to go pray. and give thanks for the end of the war and pray for those still in prison, pray for the families of those who would not welcome their boys home at that time. When the president's daughter, Robin, was suffering with leukemia for many years before she died, the president was in the oil business in Texas, in rural Texas, but on the way to work, every single morning on the way to work, he would go to his church by himself, 6:30 in the morning, and pray for his daughter. When their daughter died, Barbara would say the most intense spiritual moment she ever had, in which she felt and acknowledged and could really embrace the presence of God, was there with her daughter at the moment of her death, and then brushing her hair after death. She felt the presence of God. And so that began to shape them. When the president was running for president and he won, he was still very active at St. Martin's when he was in town. And the second rector is the senior pastor of the church. Second rector, a wonderful guy named Claude Payne, who went on to be a bishop in Texas. And Claude was rector at the time, and he gets a call a week or so out from the election. And the vice president says, "Well, Claude, I think our chances are pretty good." And if those of you old enough to remember, they were very good, but and he won by a landslide. But he said, "You know what? Next Tuesday's the election. Claude, would you mind?" And that's the way he would do it. "Would you mind? Can we do this?" He said, "Would you mind next Wednesday, win, lose, or draw? When the election's over, I want to have a worship service at St. Martin's. And if I lose, we're going to gather together. We're going to pray for the winner. And if I win, we're going to gather together and give thanks." And again, where are those days? And so they had that service. And then when they came back to Houston, what I began to see is they love to show off their church. So there were a lot of acknowledgement moments, the 10th anniversary of the Bush Library, and he would invite me to pray, or the 25th anniversary of the liberation of Kuwait, he would invite me to pray. And these moments are all I talk about in the book. But again and again, kind of these wonderful, poignant moments where I saw, they really do care about their church. They really do care about their faith. And they were wonderful people. So let's do PowerPoint. Can we do that, Eric? Are we ready? Thank you very much. So, I have a cheat screen here. So here's the cover of the book. Did I tell you they're for sale out front? And did Billy tell you Mother's Day is coming? I was somewhere, I can't remember where I was. It was Valentine's Day. And I said, "Oh, you remember it's Valentine's Day?" The shock across many men in the room was, they ran out to the book table. So this is the old church. If you're ever in Houston, please come see us. We'd love to see you at St. Martin's. But this is the old church. And the funny thing about this picture is you see, that's little George on the right. You see Barr, and you see the president, and then you see Dora, that's their daughter Dora. And then the other three boys are Neil, Marvin, and Jeb. And because of the way they all kind of tow-headed kids, I know them, I've met them, but I didn't know them then. And so when Barr died, I thought, well, this would be a great picture to put on the bulletin, and because we have it at the church. And I asked the family. So I do put this in the book. I said, "Hey, family, is it okay if we use this picture? I mean, I know and they all said, 'Oh, yeah.' And I said, 'But I'd like to identify everybody.' I said, 'I see Barbara, I see George, I see Big George, I can see Dora. Who are the kids?' Because I don't know who's who." And so there's this little email chain from that day where I send the email to all the kids, and they start emailing back, 'Oh, yes, you can use it. Who are the kids? Who is this? I can see.' And then I said, 'But I don't know who, somebody's blocked.' And Dora said, 'Oh, that's Jeb. He's behind his brother.' And Jeb takes in and he goes, 'Oh, well, that's the story of my life.' So this was Bring a Friend to Church Sunday. So the president decided he'd bring Margaret Thatcher. And he was very proud of his church. This is the second rector of St. Martin's, Claude Payne. And they were really regular church people. The president would serve coffee, he would usher, they taught Sunday school. She was part of a group called the Saintly Stitchers, which is a group of women who get together and stitch the pew cushions and the kneelers and the cushions. And she was Barbara was, what I used to kid around, what came in here came out here, and everything. But every now and then she would share this thing with me that I thought would be incredibly pastoral, sensitive, confidential as her priest. And I would hold it in. And then all of a sudden I would hear one of the Saintly Stitchers tell me, and she said, "Oh no, she told all of that last week in the room." But you saw them very active. This is that service the week after, the day after he's elected, where he's given thanks for the election. This is the St. Louis Stitchers made all these little nativity scenes for Barr, and Barr had them all come up to the White House. She invited them all up to the White House to be her guest, and wanted to show off the St. Louis Stitchers. All right, so here's the institution. The institution of a rector is when you're actually installed as the rector, and that was, I came in the fall of '07, but I waited till '08 for a number of reasons. And the reason I put this up here, first of all, you get to see my dad, my late mom, my late mother-in-law, and my wonderful kids, and my beautiful wife. All of those were there, but the president and Barr were there. And it's an institution's a long service, as the bishop over here knows. And I was getting ready for that. All of a sudden, I found out it was their anniversary. It's their wedding anniversary, their 62nd wedding anniversary. And so we're taking these pictures, and then we're going to be going into this long service. And I said, "Oh, Mr. President, I'm so sorry that we planned this on the night of your anniversary. And please feel free. We've taken the pictures. Please go home, go celebrate." And Barbara said, first of all, she said, "Well, we've had a few." And then she said, "But this is where we want to be. We want to be at our church, and we want to support our pastor as you begin your ministry here." So one of the loveliest things he did, and for my family, was we were serving in Pensacola, Florida at the time, at beautiful Christ Church, if you've ever seen that church downtown Pensacola. And when we first heard from St. Martin's, and we engaged in the process and all that. But I'm a child of the I-65 corridor. I mean, I grew up in Birmingham. I love that area. I mean, we've got a lot of family in Nashville, a lot of family here, a lot of friends here. Everybody we loved was east of the Mississippi. So when we got this call, it was going to be hard. And we knew it was a call from the Lord. I can go into that during Q&A if you want it. But so there were a lot of heartstrings that were being tugged. So one day we're wrestling with all that. And I'm leaving the house. I'm still in Pensacola, but I've already said yes. I'm leaving the house, and the phone rings. It was May of '07, and I see this is the old days. You youngsters out there used to be phones with wires that went to the wall. And so this was that. And I saw on the display, Office of President George H.W. Bush. And I thought, this was a pastoral emergency I was going out the door for. I thought, well, do I go to the emergency, or do I take the president? I'll take the president's call. So, we just talked for a minute, and he said, "We're excited you're coming. Look forward to getting to know you," and blah, blah, blah. And, I hung up the phone, called my wife immediately. "You're never going to guess." And somehow he got wind that this was going to be a hard move for us. So about a week and a half, 2 weeks later, when we moved to Houston, we had all four of our parents, and we're down to my dad, last man standing. But about 2 weeks later, the president hand wrote 2-page letters to all four parents. And he said, "I just want you to know, I know this is hard for you. I know, I know you love having them close, but don't worry, we're going to take care of them. We're going to love on them. We look forward to becoming friends with them, and we look forward to meeting you." And all those things came true. And that's the kind of people they were. So this is the kind of thing that would drive the Secret Service crazy. So the president, if this is a youth group event out in our church parking lot, and he would just amble out of church and kind of wander over and sit down in the middle. And the Secret Service is, don't sit with teenagers. And then we had the Houston Marathon was for many years ran right by the church. And the president Barr would leave church and they go straight out to the main road, and they'd start shaking hands with the Houston Marathon people. And it was great to see people kind of come around the corner and go, "Is that the president?" But then they'd slow down and slow up the marathon, and the Secret Service were trying to pull them back, but they stood out there and shook as many hands as they could. And that was usually in January. They were very much part of every campaign that we had. We've had some building campaigns out there. And this is a kickoff for a campaign we were starting to build some things out there. There's their good friends, Jim and Susan Baker, but they showed up for all of that kind of stuff. Here's a day when I gave the president an award. We have an award we call the Star Award. And it's given to everybody. I get to choose people every year who best exemplify St. Martin's ministry and work in the community. And they were always on me about outreach. And we're a church that believes very much in outreach, very involved in the community. But that was usually their first question. What are we doing in the community to make a difference in the community? So 25% of our budget goes back into the community in some form in the way of ministry. And we don't give where we don't have active boots on the ground. So I actually asked, because I was ready for this question, we actually keep up with how many people we serve. So if we serve in a soup kitchen, serve at a homeless shelter, so since January to now, we've served right at 32,000 people in the streets of Houston. That's our volunteers. But that was in large part because they set the tone for that kind of service. So I recognized them with this award. And the president motion. He said, can I have the microphone? Yes, sir, you can. You're the president. So I gave him the microphone and he wanted to say something. And as he started to thank the church, he got all teary eyed and choked up and he started crying and he couldn't finish. And about 3 days later, he sent me a letter of apology, which I include in the book. So you don't have to play. I'm so sorry. I'm 82 now. I cry more than I used to, but I just love my church so much. So just a great guy. So here's kind of one of the pushes that he did. So the longer we were there, and Houston is a very diverse community. And if you come to Houston, over 100 different languages are spoken in the Houston school systems, 100 different languages. So we have people from all over the world there, all kind of faith communities. And we're having the 25th anniversary of the Points of Light Foundation. And the president wanted to show off his church. And it had never been in Houston. So the year that it was in Houston, the president said, I would love for us to start all of that with a church service. So he called and his son called and we sat down. I said, oh, we can do that. And I'm real good friends with a Hebrew rabbi named David Lyon and a Muslim imam, Wazir Ali. And the three of us had done things together in Houston on occasion. So I started with them. Well, then all the other religionists started finding out and they wanted to be part of the service. So we had to kind of go, okay, all right, let's get a Baptist, we're gonna get a Methodist. And then we found out, well, they're conservative Baptists and there's progressive Baptists. So we got to get both of them in. And then there were, who knew, conservative Jewish and progressive Jewish. So we had to get both of them. And then we got some Buddhist priests up here, priestesses. And I mean, everybody wanted a part of it. It was getting bigger and bigger. So I said, nobody can preach. So we're all part of the service, but none of us are going to preach. We're just going to say a prayer from our tradition. And there was one guy, and I'm not going to point him out because he came, that I was worried. He can't stop himself. If my wife were here, she would say the same thing about me, but he can't stop himself. And I knew, and this was going to be a long service, and I knew this guy he's going to get up. He's not going to just say a prayer. And he came in, and he goes, I've got laryngitis tonight. And I went, thank you, Lord. I was just like, he was still there. He's up here. I'm not going to point him out, but he participated, but he had laryngitis. The Lord does answer prayers. And and we did a moment in the White House, which I'll come back to if you have questions, but that was a very interesting, that was a few days before he left office. So there was an interesting exchange there. He was trying to give away, lots of people do get to go to the Oval Office. Have you ever been? Anybody been? So you usually leave with gifts, they give you. And so we're finishing up this visit. And the president looks at, this is my young son who's now 28, and looks at my son and says, George W. said, so Luke, you a baseball fan? And I'm thinking, say yes, Luke, say yes, whatever he says. And Luke says yes. He goes, oh, come over here, I'm going to sign you a baseball. So he signs it. You have any brothers or sisters? And I'm thinking, say 20, Luke, say 20. Yeah. So yeah, and he signs one. And then he says, and he calls an aide in, and he starts putting all this. Or is this going to be seen in places other than here?
Probably not.
Okay. All right. So he starts putting all this stuff in, like pencils and M&Ms and baseball, golf balls. And my wife goes, are you trying to get rid of all this before the next guy comes in? And he said, quote, damn right. And so we had a little picture moment and we left. So this is in Kennebunkport. I'm going to pause here because one of the stories in the book is from Kennebunkport. We were fortunate to go many times as guests of the president and Barr, and it is a beautiful place. Believe it or not, just other than the geography, it's a pretty modest home. And I say that I've been in a lot of the homes here in Houston. They actually lived in a modest home in Houston. But it's a great place to be in that big house. But they have these other houses that are on there, and smaller houses. And so we would go and be guests. And Barr would always invite our children. So our kids came. Well, one year, Barr said, come and bring your kids, and they can bring their friends. And my wife and I went, who are they going to invite? And at that time, they were kind of teenage boys, and you know what teenage boys are like. So we always had this plan. You land in Boston. It's about a 90-minute drive, and we give them all the rules. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir. You talk less, speak, all those things you say to your children. And so my son, who at the time was dating someone who we were not happy about, and decided to invite her. And we went, okay. So she comes along for the ride. And we land in Boston, we give them the speech, we arrive at Kennebunkport, we go kind of check into our little bungalow, we're headed over the house for beverages before dinner, and we look over and the new girlfriend is having a disagreement with Barbara. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I just want to tackle you to the ground. Keep your mouth shut. And of all things, it was over how to pronounce Ralph Lauren. If you know, the Bush's granddaughter had just married a Lauren. So Barbara very, very kindly, as Barbara would do, said, you know, we happen to know a lot of the Lauren family. And I just wanted to die. And I thought this is going to get worse. We get to dinner, it does get worse. And so you break up from dinner and we're leaving the dinner table. And the kids go off and the president and Bar and I are talking for a minute and they go off to bed. And Bar says, well, hey, before y'all go to bed, look at this new it's a wedding album about the Lauren wedding. And she said, why don't you two sit there, which was kind of weird because lights are going out in the house and they're going off to bed. So Laura and I sat there for a minute. We're flipping through the book before we go to bed. And everybody goes, and then the Barbara comes out in her house coat and her slippers and her nightgown. She comes walking over and she goes, so what are we going to do about the girl? And so that whole moment, that's here in the book. And the end of that was, she said, he'll figure it out. And he did. So this is walking on the beach in Kennebunkport, which we did a lot of. This was a great day when, I mean, most times we went up there, we went on long walks. This particular day, we took a picture and some guy came up to her and said, you look just like Barbara Bush. I'm serious, just like that. She goes, I hear that. And then he took like 2 or 3 steps and then he realized it and came back horrified. She said, no, don't worry, it does happen. So this is just one of my favorite pictures with the president. It's a church event. And so Bar passes away before him, which is a surprise to us because we thought he would go before her, but it was in April of 2018. And so this is at St. Martin's. All of these things happen at St. Martin's. The president wanted church services for his funerals. And he loved his church. He wanted people to come to his church. So this was in our parish hall, and there's the 2 Georges coming in together, and how much he's loved by so many people of all walks of life and all political, a variety of political places too. He loved to wear goofy socks, as you know, and that was to promote literacy a lot of times. Here's his good friend, Jim Baker. This is all in our parish hall. His good friend, Brent Scowcroft, Brian Mulrooney and John Major, Dan Quayle, who would have guessed this friendship, Bill Clinton. And so they don't teach you this in seminary, but there comes this moment where although they should, right, Bishop, they probably should. You might have this moment, but so I was asked to give all the presidents their instructions. So we line up in a circle and I'm kind of walking them through the service. And then I thought, well, here's a uniquely American moment. This isn't going to happen again, probably for a long time. So I said, you know what, why don't we hold hands and pray? So we did. So we all held hands and prayed. And the president's photographer took all these. So if we weren't seeing, this was a uniquely American moment. For 2 hours, everybody got along. And thanks to the Episcopal Church, we got together. We had a wonderful worship service. They all sang together, which is a really touching moment, and different parts of that service. The service this is Barbara's service, and so much support from the city. And then they were so loved in Texas and around the globe, but really in Texas. But we leave and they're buried at College Station, some 90 miles away. And I'm telling you, from the church to College Station, people were lined up all along the road for 90 miles. And this is the kind of stuff that we saw. I probably had 100 pictures like this. I love this, kind of a punk rocker wearing her beads, her Barbara beads. Thank you, First Lady. Then the president passes away. There's Sully. A lot of y'all heard stories about Sully. Barbara and the president had these 2 obnoxious dogs, BB and Minnie, and they were Maltipoos, and they barked and they bit people. And when God Glover, I'm sure they're discussing it now, when Barbara passed away and the president was, all of a sudden the dogs just disappeared. and here came Sully, who was really sweet. So, but Sully spent a lot of time around the president's funeral coffin. And we did go up on Air Force One. My wife looked at me and said, this is a neat ride. And I said, well, so one time, it's going to happen one time. And Sully, for some reason, came and sat at our feet for the flight up. There's a good moment with Jim Baker and my wife Laura on the plane, and I write about this in the book. I did a lot of interviews with people on the left and the right. I did Fox, I did MSNBC, CBS, all those places. But what was interesting about this is that Anderson is a professed atheist, And at first, I don't think he knew what to do with me. But they called. I was in my hotel room and they called and said, do you want to come down and interview? And I just done an interview with Greg Garrison, your religion writer, here over the phone. Went down there and actually it ended up being a really, really nice interview. And enabled me to talk about the Episcopal Church, which I was happy to do. Here's the funeral at Washington Cathedral. 3,500 people came, 17.5 million people watched. And just some incredible moments, again, coming together. That's the only opportunity I had to preach to that kind of crowd. And I didn't know when the president started holding out his fist like this at the end of the service, if he was happy or not. So it was a fist bump. But and that he was real kind of ramped up about it not being too long. And so there actually are some funny stories about that, but I'll leave that for you to read in the book. There were 13 moments like this, ruffles and flourishes, hail to the chief, and all of these were planned. We started planning this 10 years ahead of time. And it was a 7-day from the moment of death to the moment of burial, a 7-day schedule. And we had everything on the schedule, every minute of every hour of every day. And we didn't slip up in any of those places. In the president's funeral. Didn't know I was going to have the Oak Ridge Boys and Reba McEntire sing in my church, but I took them and we didn't have to pay them. So it was really nice that they came along and added a little bit. And then Schwarzenegger came. And there's a story about that in the book as well. I did not know it was him because look, these are my clergy. They saw him. I shook hands with him, but I didn't know it was him because he was sitting with the mayor and some clergy. And I walked by, shook hands, and then I said, and I went back, somebody said, you know who that was? I said, no, there's the mayor. That was Schwarzenegger. I said, guy, he's short. He was, and he's got a big beard. And I thought he was a Greek Orthodox priest. I mean, I didn't know. So I missed my moment. But he stood with my clergy. He was good friends with the Bushes. And then again, when we leave, this kind of incredible devotion to them as we arrive in College Station. Look at this. I mean, this was everywhere. And we took that train. Look at this. This is all the way down. People were there. And then we turned the corner, we got on the campus, and there they were. Incredible moment. 300 male and female cadets at College Station. They had been there for 3 hours waiting for this moment in the rain. And when we turned the corner, they were saluting as we came by. You don't forget a moment like that, you know. And then the walk to the graveside. And I only include that one because there was a time when I looked younger than I am now. And we liked this picture. The Bushes and I liked this picture because it was a fun moment. They were still healthy, and we all looked younger, and we were all healthier at the time. And that's the president's kind of motto: ceiling and visibility unlimited. Those of you in the Air Force know what that means, but that's the way he lived his life: ceiling and visibility unlimited. So I'm going to close with a little reading, and I do have a short video if you want to watch it. It's a great moment to go back to the world on. Does the video work, Eric? Good. Okay. Good. So let me just read this little passage to you. I like to end with this because I think, you know, I'm a Christian, and I'm a particular flavor of Christian, an Episcopalian. It was interesting after the services, both services, the one in DC and both in Houston, I probably received somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 to 700 personal letters, and a lot of the from around the world, and a lot of the letters said things like, I was really inspired by that worship service I saw. Where does that come from? And I was able to say, as an Episcopalian, it came from our prayer book. And I said, and interestingly enough, for instance, the week Barbara died, we had 5 funerals inside of 10 days. Hers was one of 5. And they all pretty much looked the same, except for who came. And I said, this service really does speak of our faith. And so I wanted to kind of pepper the book with things about our faith, but in particular about the Episcopal faith. And I end with this meditation about the times that we're living in. And then I do end with a reflection on what I think most Christians believe about what happens about life after death. And believe me, the president and Barr believed in life after death. So the day before, 2 days before Barr died, she got very ill. We thought it was the end. I was called to the house. And so I got to the house, and the president was downstairs. Some of the family members were downstairs. I came in, he was very teary-eyed. And Dora came downstairs after being with Barr, and she said, Mom's upstairs, she's resting. And I said, does she want me to come pray? And she said, let me go check. She goes upstairs, and she came back down. She said, Mom wants you to stay with Dad. And the president goes, well, I want you to go pray with her. I said, yes, sir, Mr. President. So I go upstairs, I knock on the door, and Barr goes, I'm not checking out yet. So I said, okay, Bar, I just want to come in. Can I come in and pray? And your husband wants me to do this, so you don't have to. But she said, no, of course, come in. So I come in, we chat. I anoint her head with oil, pray for her, give her a little kiss on the head. And as I'm leaving, I'm pulling the door closed, and she calls back out to me. I go back in. I said, Bar, are you okay? And she says, yes. Just tell him I adore him. So I go downstairs. And he says, how is she? What did she say? I said, well, the first thing she said, Mr. President, she's not checking out yet. And I said, but she also wanted me to tell you she adores you. And so we thought she was going to die that night. But then the next day, as sometimes happens, she rallied. And so she began making phone calls like crazy to family and friends. Now, they did not tell me about this moment. I can't remember who did, frankly, and I don't include it in the book. But it happened. Sometime that day, they were sitting alone together in this room where we often sat to have, because when they couldn't get to church, I would bring church to them, bring communion to the house, and we'd pray and visit. And they were sitting there together, and he looks at her and he says, I'm going to be okay. And she looks at him and says, and I'm going to be okay. And then he said, well, let's have a drink. And so she had a martini, she had a Manhattan, which was their favorites. And that was about it. And so that evening she began to slip away. And the next morning I got to the house, and by then she was not talking. Those of us who were with her, we spent the day reading to her throughout the day, just sitting next to her. I came in, I read all the way to the 80-something Psalm. I can't remember which one. And then the Psalms can get kind of dark and scary. So I stopped and switched over to a different book of literature. But at some point that day, the power went out. I'm telling you that for a particular reason. The power rarely went out in that area, I guess because the president lived there. And the president was with her most of the day, holding her hand. And oftentimes people were coming and going in and out of the room. But when it really got serious, he was right there. And he had to go away for just a little bit for a massage. He had Parkinsonian syndrome, and you have to kind of keep the legs, the blood flowing in the legs. But he came in, and we were sitting there, and the power's out, and this is where we'll go. The last word I heard her speak, and it was the last word she spoke, was home. So I was with the president when he died. I was with Barr when she died. And so and then I'll finish. So we're sitting there, the president, and some people are coming and going, and I'll pick it up there. If I heard it once, I heard it 24 times. As he sat there, holding her hand through the day, he said, Barr, I love you, Barr, with such brazen passion and tenderness that it was palpable. At one point, when he and she and I were together alone, he looked at me, gently smiled, pointed at her, and then pointed toward heaven. Yes, sir. I said, that's where she'll be. At 5:30 p.m., the power was still out. By then, Barr's physician had arrived, and both he and Evan, who was the medical aide, said, we are there. If there's anything you want to say, now's the time to say it. Neil, his son, asked me to pray again. I anointed her head with a cross of oil. The president was holding her hand, as he had been all day. Everyone in the room, all of us, knelt by her bed. Neil and Maria, Pierce, Sarah Beth, Evan, Neely, Marshall, and I. We all put our hands on her and again prayed the prayers we had prayed only a few nights before. Almighty God, look on this your servant lying in great weakness and comfort her with the promise of life everlasting, given in the resurrection of your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Into your hands, O merciful Savior, we commend your servant, Barbara. As we prayed, we wept, and we held on to one another, and we held on to Barbara. In my entire life, this is one of the few moments where the demonstrable presence of God was as real to me as the pages of the book you're now holding. When I finished with Amen, everyone was weeping and telling Barr, I love you. The doctor was near, and Barr took her final breath. She's gone, the doctor whispered, and the president asked him to repeat it. She's gone to heaven, Mr. President. And the Celtic Christians teach about something they call thin places. Thin places are those times and moments, people and experiences that you have or encounter. And for whatever reason, at that juncture, at that meeting point, the line between heaven and earth is so thin, it's hardly detectable, if detectable at all. And I'll share a few of those thin places with you in this book, and here is one. At the moment the Barr's physician said a second time, she's gone to heaven, Mr. President, at that very moment, the lights, the power came back on in that instant. We were all still kneeling, all still weeping. Maria, his daughter-in-law, her daughter-in-law, lifted her head, looked at me and whispered, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. I said, but let's just take it for what it's worth. Now's the time for family and not for those of us who are not. So Evan, Neely, and the doctor and I left, and the door closed. We were quietly standing in the hall outside the room. Pierce, his grandson, opened the door and said, "Russ, he wants you to come in and pray again." So I came in and I knelt in front of the president and by Barr's body, and I placed their hands together, his on top of hers, and I put my hands around both of theirs. And I gave thanks for their life. I prayed that God would welcome one of his own. I prayed that God would comfort the president and all Barr left behind. And I thank God for the love and witness of these two and this wonderful family. When I finished, the president and I were both in tears. But while I was still on my knees, I took his face in my hands and I said, "Mr. President, she is at peace now. She is in heaven. She's with her parents and your parents, and she's with your dear Robin, and you will see her again. And you, sir, will be okay. We will take care of you. We love you. I love you. I love you," he said. I kissed him on the cheek and I stepped back out of the room. It was up to that point the most intense moment of my ordained ministry. God was present and real and there in that moment. And Barbara was home. Now they're happy moments in that book, and really that was a happy moment because over the next few months we got to spend time together as he declined, as he got ready to go and be with our Lord, which he did in a very, very similar way. So questions or video? I'm watching our time. I want to be on.
I would say maybe a couple questions.
Okay. Any questions? Yes, sir. And I'll be brief, briefer than. No, but his aides would. And sometimes I found out before others found out, and on the aide, his right hand was a woman named Jean Becker. And we decided to jump out on his 90th birthday. My wife and I were headed to Israel. And I include this in the book, actually. And she goes, "Oh gosh, pray for him. He's gone crazy. He's going to jump out on his 90th birthday." And I said, "Well, actually, I'm being Israel, so it's a local call. So I'll be praying and watching." And I did, and it went okay. But yeah, anything else? Anything else? Yeah, Norman.
Someone does not like to read books. Have another option.
They do. Yeah, it's on Kindle, and then there's an audio book. And unfortunately, I did it. So it's 10 and a half hours of what you're experiencing now. But the foreword was written by Jeb, and he actually commends me for my work. So I thought, I can't really read that. And mercifully, and I have to say, and wonderfully, I've gotten to be friends with the actor Gary Sinise, over the years. Wonderful guy, wonderful Christian, wonderful patriot. And I reached out to Gary. So Gary reads the foreword. So you get like about 3 minutes of Gary, and then you get 10 and a half hours of me. Sorry, but yes, there is. So thank you all very, very, very much.
And I'm going to let Dr. Levenson get out early so you can meet him outside and buy several copies of his book. So thank you, Russ, for joining us today and providing us a look into the private lives of these public leaders and doing it so gracefully. In appreciation for joining us today, we are making a gift to your alma mater, Birmingham Southern, on your behalf. Join us next week for our annual meeting. It will be full of celebrations as we present the Legion of Honor Awards for years of service to our club. One Kalanian will be marking 60 years in our club. In addition to the annual meeting, we'll hear from Malcolm McDonald, Endeavor Birmingham's general manager. Malcolm will share how Endeavor's work has the potential to transform not just our community's entrepreneurial system, but the economic face of Birmingham for generations to come. Please join us. Thank you for coming today. Please come back. Meeting is adjourned.